joint session. So this is really brilliant. So yes, Himanshu mentioned about the need for capacity building at the local level. And it may come across to you as like, oh, is it sort of this conversation detached from nature-based solutions? Mighty not. It is not disconnected from nature-based solution. And I would like to sort of connect this conversation and this talk and presentation that we are going to have today to nature-based solutions. But the conversation that we have today is a little bit, more strategic. It's about innovation. It's about systems-based management innovation, and it's about what we need to sort of better implement nature-based solutions or other cross-sectoral solutions and initiatives towards creating more sustainable and resilient communities at the local level. So we all know that while nature-based solutions have been conceived as practical solutions for urban resilience, the uptake of the concept has been limited today. This is something that Zita in her presentation yesterday flagged it clearly. And I totally agree with that. But before actually continuing this conversation, I would like to run a quick activity with all of you. It's going to take only 1 minute. So I would like to ask each and every one of you to think about one of the biggest challenges that is limiting uptake of nature-based solutions at the local level. What challenge comes to your mind as a top priority challenge or gap that is sort of impeding implementation of nature-based solutions at the local level? For this, I would like to give all of us 1 minute to think about it. Write in the chat, but do not press the enter. I'm going to give us 1 minute to think about the most impeding challenge for implementation of nature-based solutions from governance, finance, anything that comes to your mind, institutional arrangement, anything. Lack of capacity, lack of enabling environment for innovation, anything that you have dealt with. Write it in the chat box that is available for everyone. And then in 40 seconds, when I say, please press the enter to capture the audience, to capture the answers. I myself am going to add that.
Okay, Purya, so if I got it correctly, just to repeat it, everyone is supposed to type one particular word or a phrase which they believe is one of the main challenges in terms of capacity at the local level, and don't hit the send button yet.
Yes, I see one of the colleagues did, that's totally fine, but just getting ready and then maybe 15 more seconds.
All right. And I hope for everyone else, you are able to use the chat function. In case not, please let us know. And just a housekeeping thing I forgot to do. Any question that you have, please put in the question and answer tab. And we will try to make this session as interactive as possible. Okay, Purya, is time up?
Please, everyone, press the enter.
Okay.
I love the answers. I love the answer. Let's start with the first one. Knowledge, especially for the local people. Absolutely. Uncertainty. Love that. Financial capacity. Something that Christian from Munich Re Foundation mentioned yesterday, as funding and financial resources as one of the impeding factors for implementation of nature-based solutions. Inclusion of local communities. Brilliant. But the question, Christopher, who should include local communities? Who should enable them? Fabian is talking about conflicting interests. Absolutely. Who is responsible for mapping them and making sure that there is a clear pathway towards achieving goals at the local level? Anna is talking about voice, unheard voice. Yes, unheard voice, marginalized group, and youth, and so on and so forth. Nice one. Moino is talking about, again, financial support. Competing priorities, more or less the same as conflicting interests by Stefan. Christian, missing knowledge about moving from pilot phase to larger scale, uptake, scaling up, fantastic. Anita is talking about financial restrictions and lack of horizontal governance. Beautiful. Horizontal governance is a thing that we mentioned yesterday as well. Interpretation of nature-based solutions into actions. Correct. This I love it. Information, prioritization of governance, and perhaps the needed institutional arrangement for that. Land use conflict, changing technology, actionable knowledge, local knowledge. We had that grassroots. Maybe we can translate it to grassroots knowledge. Lack of cost-effective studies, true. Lack of vision, policy, local knowledge, and lack of political will. I loved it. I love all the answers. So here's the deal. Like, I really would like to quickly recap on what we just discussed. So a lot of the colleagues agree that inadequate financial resources can be a significant barrier to nature-based solutions implementation. So specific funding opportunities to facilitate the implementation of nature-based solutions are limited. You're all aware of it. In addition, many of the co-benefits associated with nature-based solutions can be realized only in the long term, whereas funding schemes tend to be short-term in nature, right? So institutional fragmentation, another thing that we also had amongst the answer, particularly the sectoral silos, is another important barrier. So different departments usually work in line with their own vision, legal frameworks and procedures, and use their own sectoral language and approach. So the need for breaking silos is absolutely important. And that's where this horizontal governance is needed. But again, I would like to stimulate your thinking here. Who is the responsible? Who can break the silos? Who can sort of underpin horizontal governance at the local level? Another challenge is different responsibilities distributed among multiple agencies and departments. And this is a barrier for the production of benefits from nature-based solutions, and limit the opportunities for incorporating novelty in the nature-based solutions planning and management process. This is another challenge in my eyes. But also, the split among responsibility can cause confusion about who is the owner of what, who is the responsible, and who should actually operate and maintain nature-based solutions in the long term. Another challenge that a lot of colleagues mentioned, lack of information, or I can say the uncertainty regarding nature-based solutions implementation process and benefits is this has been frequently mentioned as a critical barrier limiting the uptake of nature-based solutions by decision makers. So as innovations dealing with complex societal ecological systems, nature-based solutions are characterized by multiple uncertainties, right? So the lack of comprehensive information regarding the creation, implementation, and management of nature-based solutions, as well as the dearth of evidence regarding nature-based solutions effectiveness across widespread spatial and temporal scales may lead to a great deal of uncertainty, particularly among the public, or even invoke conflict among actors, the conflict of interest that some other colleagues and participants mentioned. This can actually invoke the conflicts and sort of exacerbate the situation. So the body of knowledge regarding nature-based solutions has remained largely academic, right? So this with very limited diffusion, which has negatively affected the level of acceptance of nature-based solutions by the public. So engagement of the public, that one of the colleagues mentioned as one of the barriers, this is stemming from this point. And then in many cases, the benefits of nature-based solutions may be fully realized only in the long term. Again, I'm focusing on the long-term visioning, long-term planning, and there is a need for, there is a point about it, which we'll get to that shortly. But limiting the acceptance to local level actors with short-term agendas, this is a challenge. So the successful implementation of nature-based solutions requires long-term collaboration, long-term collaborative efforts among multiple stakeholders. Thus, there is a need to view nature-based solutions as the benefits delivered from a longer-term perspective rather than short-term perspective. So you remember one of the colleagues yesterday when we were putting our buzzwords talk about alignment and realignment. To me, alignment of budgets as one of the examples, one of the challenges and barriers that we discussed, with the vision that we have, is another key factors that we need to tackle if we are really looking into deployment of nature-based solutions to create more sustainable and resilient communities. So municipalities have limited resources. You're all aware of it, and they have the autonomy in deciding how to allocate the expenditure, and this alignment and realignment that we discussed is needed when we are thinking about cross-sectoral solutions and activities such as nature-based solutions. So sole reliance on governmental and municipal resources to finance solutions place a great deal of pressure on these institutions, right? We all know that there is a limit to the financial resources. So we cannot rely only on the local governments and the public finance solutions available. And this highlights the critical need for additional exploration of economic opportunities related to nature-based solutions in order to encourage private investments, but also public investments. But by public, I don't mean public money, I mean people's money. These are two different things. So I really would like to encourage you to read a report by the UN Digital Task Force called People's Money. And that's where my colleagues are talking about mobilizing citizens' investment to finance sustainability projects. And obviously, nature-based solutions is one of them. So at the moment, we are working on this concept of crowdfunding or crowd financing as one of the innovative ways facilitated by digital innovation. But again, I'm asking this question: who is responsible to take the first step towards paving the way and creating a space that these new approaches can take place at the local level? It's local leadership team, right? So this local leadership team conversation is quite important because they are who can actually not only realign the budget, not only break the silos across different departments under their leadership, but they can also create a space for engagement of other stakeholders and facilitate other new innovative opportunities, from financial opportunities to other types of innovation, social innovation, and so on and so forth. Another identified barrier to uptake and implementation of nature-based solution to me is so-called path dependency of organizational decision-making, which sort of confines decision makers by their active memory based on past experiences, and often leads to resistance to change, right? So we know that they are, while they can't take, their position is in a way that they can, take the center stage in creating so many change, but this path dependency at the mindset of local leaders is the big challenge actually there. So changing the mindset of stakeholders in general, but local leadership teams in particular, toward nature-based solutions can be a difficult process. And breaking the path dependency requires changing individual and societal behavior. So it's basically suggested that the limited uptake of innovative approaches to providing societal functions may be caused by structural conditions, such as dominant policy or funding arrangements that we discussed, prevailing knowledge paradigms, or incumbent actor networks with vested interests. So established regimes and established regime structures form a selection environment for innovation. Their inertia may prove a source of barriers to the uptake of innovative approaches that deviate from the regime norms, existing regime norms and routines. So far, what we've discussed, and with your contribution, is the fact that a lot of the challenges are known to us. But when we take the next, the second look, we see that a lot of these challenges could be tackled, or the environment could be prepared in a way that other stakeholders could tackle these challenges through empowerment by the local leadership team, right? So the local governments are not only the service providers, but they are also community enablers. And more this shift is and should happen at the local level. So from this very important role of the local leadership team, there is the fact that this mindset shift is necessary. And I would like to draw your attention to a very recent experience. I assume you have heard of a recent happening called COVID pandemic that apparently hit everyone globally. So what was this pandemic had for us in terms of learning, how we can bounce forward. It's building upon the lessons learned from this pandemic. So we learned that cities and their surroundings have been at the forefront of the COVID-19 pandemic and its associated challenges. So the pandemic has demonstrated that while national and state governments play a very critical role in disaster response and resource mobilization, cities and urban systems bear the brunt of these challenges, right? So globally, the pandemic forced local governments to adapt on the spot, create solutions to complex emergencies, and coordinate with multiple levels of government and stakeholders to respond to this shock. While the responses of local governments are generally commendable, that's a view of an expert sitting at the largest and leading global network of cities, the experience, I must admit, that has heightened some emerging and critical realizations about managing complexities at the local level. So I would like to share a few of the insights we captured and a few key takeaways from the pandemic when it comes to local governance and the role of local governments. So first, conventional municipal governance systems, management structures, budgeting policies, practices, anything that may come to your mind, are increasingly insufficient for addressing the growing complexity of global challenges. I quickly, I guess, addressed Coco yesterday, that in 2018, when we were talking about world's future risk and adaptation, in 2018, we were never thinking of a pandemic that could hit the global economy, people's lives, but also, all aspects of society, including our planet and environment, right? So this complex system on this planet is becoming even more complex, right? Increasingly complex. And then it's a fact that this conventional municipal governance systems are insufficient to address these challenges. The other point is that the unintended consequences of this inadequacy disproportionately affects already marginalized communities and exacerbate vulnerabilities and inequalities. One of the colleagues is one of the challenges they mentioned, unheard voices, right? So yes, correct. And unheard voices are mainly marginalized group, or at least marginalized group are part of them. But then this type of situation, the increasing complexity, take the example of COVID, is exacerbating the situation. So this challenge is something that we need to think about, how we can address these challenges. What do we need to make sure that we address these challenges in a timely and efficient manner to avoid and lessen the further disproportional impact on these groups. The other point is that we learned that there's a need to move beyond incremental and short-term solutions and more adequately and effectively meet the requirements of transformative resilience. Transformative resilience in which nature-based solutions take center stage. So it is very important for us to think that incremental innovation as one of the common pathways is not enough anymore. We need structural innovation, which the enterprise evolution that we're going to get into that is actually based on structural changes. And finally, administrative leaders, local leadership teams, we learned that they need to be capacitated through shifting the mindset that we were talking about, and access to new strategic management tools and practices that align with these new mindsets to effectively guide a transition at their jurisdiction. So currently, these leaders have limited access to evidence-based solutions designed to support such transition across diversity of global municipalities and municipal contexts, right? Yeah. So with this, we can conclude that. I guess someone is unmuted. I would appreciate if you mute yourself.
Yeah, Poria, it was me. I was just trying to jump in because that is what we discussed, that we would poke each other during the presentation. Sure. And I would think that all the points that you have just mentioned are definitely very fantastic. I wanted to get a very quick sort of feedback on that from Randy, but I guess you were also concluding. So I don't know if you want to just conclude in 20 seconds, but then we hear from Randy.
I guess, yeah, like we have a game plan with Randy that like this now nicely fits into what Randy is going to present to the group. Because also for the participants to know, the enterprise evolution that my colleague Randy is going to present, this is something that we've been engaging more than a year with different partners and institutions that Randy is also leading on 2 of them. On that implementation, it's been tested in 1 city. Randy will get to that, and we have actually put together a program for 30 cities across the globe. So you know, this narrative has been discussed, and all these lessons learned is not only something that we draw; it is actually a collaboration with Refocus and Very Center. So with this, we can just like conclude that as the world continues to change at an accelerating rate and becomes increasingly complex, conventional management practices are falling short. So from the COVID pandemic to societal and social justice issues and our climate emergency, leaders are being forced to respond to the growing impacts of widening range of conditions. As a result, the leadership teams of local governments are finding it challenging to match past performance results while adapting to accelerating change and recognizing that their existing management capabilities may no longer be sufficient. So again, a final recap is like, now we know that there are challenges. We know that local leadership team can actually take the lead in tackling those challenges. But for that, we know that we need innovation. And we know that to provide a space for innovation, we need enabling environment and we need capabilities. And this capability should start at the local leadership team, because we need to capacitate them with tools that help them to manage complexity in an innovative way, but at the same time create space for innovation in sectoral approaches and cross-sectoral solutions such as nature-based solutions. So enterprise evolution is actually aiming at mindset shift and capacitating local leadership teams with systems-based management innovation. And this approach was developed based on the theory of change and systems approach. And that's why I chose systems approach yesterday as my buzzword, because I do believe in the need for systems approach and system thinking. So I just like put a pause here, and I would like to just yield the floor to my colleague Randy to take this further. But if you have any question, please feel free to drop it in the chat box. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Korea. Definitely. I mean, hearing the experience from eClay is always fascinating, because the sort of insight your organization has, if I'm not wrong, working with more than 2,000 cities from almost each part of the globe is fascinating. It's very comprehensive. And Randy, I guess, it definitely makes the task for you also very fascinating. You have so many points to start from, but at the same time, we're also running a bit behind the schedule. We hope to make up with that. So with this, Randy, the floor is yours. Please take us through.
Thanks very much, Himanshu and Poria for setting the stage as well. Thanks to all of my colleagues who have put together this session and for the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate having the chance to share a little bit of the insight and the innovation that I've been working on through Refocus and the Flourishing Enterprise Institute. And this is a tremendous platform. I'm excited that the linkages between nature-based solutions and the need for capacitating municipal leaders are being made, and that we're able to explore this further through the conversation. So thank you all for your listening, and I'm very much looking forward to engaging in some back and forth. But without further ado, we do have a lot to cover with a bit less time. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and we can get right into the presentation. And as has been mentioned previously, keep the questions coming. If there's anything that comes up, I'm happy to take questions on the fly and to make this as conversational as is possible within our timing.
Okay, so Randy, if I can jump before you even start.
Yes,
I already have 2 questions and I was waiting for a ton. Is that one which I really liked is that the role of private sector, particularly the large organizations. So I'm pretty sure something you are already going to cover. I would jump with a few questions as they come. Please go ahead.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So we're going to cover four topics this afternoon, I guess. So we'll talk a little bit about adapting strategic management practices, look at the enterprise evolution program itself, a little bit about what we're doing within the municipal sector, and focus on an example of systemic management innovation in the multi-capital scorecard. So off the top, I wanted to share a little bit about our theory of change. This is a really busy slide, and it was developed more for academic purposes than presentation purposes. So please don't get lost in all of the details. Some of you who may be familiar with systems theory and systems thinking may have been exposed to the iceberg model, which essentially proposes that leverage points, or the places at which there's the opportunity for the greatest change in a system, fall towards the bottom of the iceberg versus the top, where things are a little more obvious and visible. So if we take the iceberg model and apply it to our sustainability challenges and some of the stuff that's happening at a local level or a regional level, we can see that at least at a municipal, within a municipal government, most of what's happening around sustainability falls around this second layer in the iceberg at the policy development and planning level. So we have sustainability programs and climate action plans that are being developed within departments and peripheral to or separate of core strategy and the fundamentals of the strategic management practices of the organization. So they occur as an add-on. And as a result, we end up with a set of actions and performance outcomes at the highest level up here of the iceberg that, generally speaking, are more incremental than transformative. The challenge as we step back and think about the management of an enterprise of any kind, municipal or otherwise, is when we look all the way at the base. So when we go further down the iceberg, we see the third layer down being strategic management practices, and underneath that, the mindsets of leaders. So it's important to recognize that the way that we understand enterprise management is underpinned by a neoliberal, a capitalistic way of understanding the world, where most of the economic theories that were widely adopted, and then the management knowledge, practices, tools, methods that were developed on top of those ways of understanding economics, ignored limits to growth. They weren't based in an understanding of the systemic nature of the world and the interdependencies that exist between our economies, our society, and the environment. And as a result, the strategic management practices that are employed, whether it's how we account and manage finances, the way that we develop strategy, the way that we engage with stakeholders, they are based on that limited view of reality. It's really an inaccurate and narrow view of reality that doesn't reflect the complexity of the environment and any type of enterprise is situated within. And as a result, when we go from strategic management practices up the organization to policy development and planning and then actions, what happens at these levels is largely constrained. And what we see is incremental progress in the face of a climate emergency and many substantive needs that require rethinking how we value various aspects of what surrounds us, as well as the ways that we lead forward. So in terms of our theory of change, what we believe is that rather than focusing on policy development and planning, which is where most of the sustainability work happens and most of the enablement, capacity building, resource development is happening, enterprise evolution, the work we're doing, is about first shifting the mindsets of leaders. So creating an experience that helps leaders to self-recognize that inside of the current paradigm of thinking and how they've learned to understand the world from an enterprise perspective, there is a lot of risk and to some degree, an irresponsibility for understanding and engaging with the complexity of the reality of the world. So our first step is, how do we provoke or going about provoking a shift in the mindsets of leaders so that they begin to newly see reality as it is and understand the potential consequences of how we've understood our world to this point. A step up is the strategic management practices. And so we move into this, next phase from an initial stage, which is about shifting mindsets, to shifting or adapting management practices. And in this domain, our goal is to take leading systemic management innovations that have been developed globally and help leadership teams to replace their conventional ways of doing things that may reflect best practice as it stands right now, but are no longer good enough in the face of accelerating change and global complexity. And as those strategic management practices transform, the enablement that happens at a policy development and planning level will look quite different than what we experience today in the incremental way that progress is being made. And our theory would suggest that this disruption is what needs to happen in order for us to begin aligning with the trajectories that we know we need to be on in order to protect the best interest of our communities, our cities, and our planet as a whole. I wanted to quickly share just an example, and this is related to the implementation of light rail transit within municipalities. I'm sure everyone can think of an example like this. So simply, I want to say, from a basic standpoint, and if we don't think about the implementation of light rail transit systemically or fully in the system that it's part of, we might begin by seeing many positive potentials that come about. But often is the case, we miss unintended consequences or aspects of what may even be benefits that aren't immediately visible. So in terms of simple costs and breakdowns that are often identified, we see environmental benefits of getting cars off the road, making clean transit more available, having affordable transportation available, and even gentrification that may occur that based on businesses and development being attracted to the corridor along which transit lines may exist. What may be missed when, for example, we don't apply an equity lens to the development of a solution like this is the fact that businesses and residents that may be already struggling or marginalized would get priced out of the area because of the gentrification that occurs. And those are likely individuals who need and stand to benefit the most from the availability of affordable public transportation. And as a result of gentrification and being squeezed out of a central corridor, those individuals likely have to move further out where they no longer have access to the public transportation and actually have a worse situation to some degree. So in a nutshell, based on this very simple, overly simplified scenario, we would have the investment of government dollars benefiting ultimately those with property and who can afford to live near the accessible transportation that's being implemented. And we would actually create a significant burden on inner city businesses and residents who can't afford the increased cost of staying along the corridor of the transit. So these are just more obvious examples, but I'm sure you can imagine as we look at complex challenges and solutions within communities and with many stakeholders in mind, that there are all kinds of unintended consequences and lost opportunities that don't appear because of how we approach planning processes. I want to talk very briefly about this idea of systemic management innovations. So as Poria mentioned, leaders today are increasingly experiencing the consequences of leveraging conventional approaches in response to complex challenges. And the idea is to enable leaders to adapt. There have been innovators over the last decade or two around the world that have been developing systemically oriented management knowledge tools and methods that are designed to be practically applicable and enabling of leaders engaging with the challenges they face with adequate solutions. So the Flourishing Enterprise Evolution, which I helped to lead, is all about bringing applied research to the testing of these solutions, which has been ongoing for years, in practice, so that we can begin to bring evidence and a credible, unbiased perspective to the value of these innovations and why they are truly fit for purpose and enabling of enterprises of any kind, essentially doing a better job of what they're intended to do, irrespective of whether or not they're explicitly committed to sustainability ends. I will pause for a moment and just see if there's any questions or anything Poria or Himanshu want to jump in with before we get into the Enterprise Evolution program.
Yes, definitely. Thanks a lot so far. Randy, there are a few questions already. I don't know if you would like to address them right away. Let me categorize them for you. Sure. One is definitely, as I informed you in the beginning, the role of private sector. Second is who exactly is placed to undertake this systemic thinking. So which actor in your understanding would be the best actor to take these exercises? I believe you would recommend everyone, but within that, we all have different capacities. I guess you are already in a way implying who could be that actor. And third relates slightly to the delegation of tasks across different levels. So for example, by simply adding more tasks at the local level, are we going to increase the complexity while we are trying to solve the complexity through systemic thinking? So some sort of paradoxical approach that is emerging out of it. I don't know, you would like to address them now or as you go ahead?
No, it's perfect. I think these are great questions on which to help build the foundation that we've been sharing. So firstly, I think part of our theory of change and the reason why we're focused on the municipal sector, while we have worked with the private sector, what's different about municipalities is that one, they are focused at a local level, which is quite important. I think there's limitations to what you can do at a regional or national or international level, given that the context that exists locally are so different and really require very different approaches and solutions. Two, municipalities are very explicitly focused on and committed to objectives and outcomes related to social well-being and environmental sustainability. And as a result, unlike a private sector business, which may consider benefiting society or the environment in some way, shape, or form, or limiting their negative impact, a municipality as a central actor is already connected to all of the stakeholders and responsible to all the stakeholders within its community, whether those be private sector organizations, NGOs, citizens individually, community groups. And so as a central actor, they're, from our perspective, in the ideal position to orchestrate and catalyze change within their organization and through engagement with all of the organizations and individuals that they already engage with by design. Let me think back. I'm trying to remember the last question you asked. Himanshu, can you give me a quick prompt? I had it on the tip of my tongue and I just lost it.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. The last question was about by asking, municipalities these days are doing more than they used to do 10 years ago.
I got it.
While we are trying to simplify through a systemic understanding of what all they do, at the same time, we are adding to that complexity. So some sort of paradoxical nature is emerging there. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so two things. One, I wanted to say, I think what we're experiencing among municipalities, and perhaps this is more of a global north perspective, but based on my own frame of reference, I wanted to share that I think municipalities are beginning to transition from a historical sort of mandate that is focused on service provision based on collecting taxes and delivering services as it's required and defined within their jurisdiction, to more of a mandate that is focused around community enablement and empowerment. And I think part of the reason why this is happening naturally is because as we see the complex challenges that emerge because of the unsustainability of the world, as in us exceeding the planetary boundaries, not meeting social foundations, the issues that emerge at a local level. And when citizens are upset, they don't necessarily end up on the doorstep of the national governing body or a provincial or state-run government body. They go to the mayor or the city representatives where they live, and they're asking for solutions and responses to change. So there's a necessity to respond that is forcing municipalities to begin to engage with this complexity. And I think the paradox that you describe is a bit false in nature, because as soon as we step back and we consider the complexity of what is emerging and the consequences of not engaging with it fully, the degree of complexity and hardship that we're going to face over time by not engaging with the complexity is far greater than if we bring adequate and appropriate planning, thought, discipline, tools to meet or match that complexity and then respond to it effectively. So failing to respond to the complexity will only create greater complexity. So yes, there is a necessity to act, but the justification for it comes in the recognition that what we've done in the past is no longer good enough. And every day there is a growing risk to maintaining the status quo in terms of how municipalities do things and engage with the challenges that they face. I hope that's helpful, and feel free to disagree if you're not quite on the same page. Sorry, Himanshu, yeah?
I'm just saying it's all great. I mean, I really liked your take on the changing role of urban governance, particularly from service provision to sort of enablement of citizens. And that's exactly what we need for climate action. So I could not have agreed more. Really interesting answer. I'm pretty sure from the audience, we also would be getting some questions on that. But for the sake of time, let's proceed. Yeah. And as questions come, I would jump in.
I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm really going to have to skim the last portions of the presentation because we're pinched, and I do want to make as much time available as possible to answer questions. So bear with me and hold on to your seats a little bit, and I'll do my best to get us through some of the key points that are laid out for us here. Okay, so into enterprise evolution. Just trying to get this to shift. Okay, great. So as I've been saying, today's brand of financially oriented, short-term focused management methods and tools were never designed for the complexity of our rapidly changing world. And so enterprise evolution has been developed based on systems theory, and it combines leading management expertise with both natural and social sciences. So in a nutshell, enterprise evolution is recognizing the municipality of the future must deeply engage with various stakeholders and be responsive to changing conditions across contexts. You can see here in this little context diagram, which is again an oversimplification, municipality sort of sits at the local level at the smallest scale, and it's really on the municipality to recognize that achieving our objectives, or their objectives, if you will, that are generally explicitly defined by the municipality, which have everything to do with the health and well-being of the community, its environment, and the economic or the economy that sits within it. Achieving goals hinges on a collective approach and understanding of how we need to be acting across these various contexts. And so engagement with community, working with system actors at a bioregional level, understanding how things are changing planetarily, it all becomes entirely necessary for us to navigate smartly and to invest limited resources or the resources available optimally and in line with our objectives. So there's a lot of complexity to unpack here, but I'm going to leave it at that for now. I do want to share a little bit about what enterprise evolution represents. And in a nutshell, it is an organizational development program that is designed to enable senior leadership teams to enhance their strategic management practices. So the program, bringing a systems perspective or systems lens to the practice of management, prioritizes context, relationship, and learning. And the program enables enterprises to become more adaptive, effective, and efficient, as well as resilient overall. I won't go through the details at this point because I'd like to share an example that I think will be more useful. So allow me to continue onward. What you see here is a basic representation of what the program represents, and this kind of follows the iceberg model that I shared earlier. So we have an initial phase of introductory workshops where we engage very briefly with senior leadership teams, and the goal here is to help them to come to their own recognition of the emerging reality and the inadequacy of the approaches that they currently use, so that they experience a mindset shift and become very motivated and willing to consider dramatic change to how they currently practice. Our experience has been, when we lead the kinds of conversations that we do, there isn't a lot of resistance. Most senior leaders are smart people, and it's just that we've had the absence of conversation and a clear opportunity in terms that leaders subscribe to and understand, to have them pause and engage in a conversation about the emerging reality, what that means, and how poorly situated and prepared they are to deal with the complexity they face by leveraging what has been totally adequate and effective from a management perspective for the past 10, 20, 30 years that they've been practicing as leaders. So we enter into a second phase where we work with leadership teams to take systems-based or systemic management innovations, to adapt them and tailor them to their own unique needs, to prioritize how they're deployed, and to work with them to begin implementing and applying them in practice. And the goal here is not around the actual learning alone or the deployment of the innovation. It's about building capability. So ultimately, we're trying to not create a dependency. We're trying to maximize impact and enable organizations to adapt in the best way possible. And this means that by the conclusion or through the process of implementing these innovations hand in hand, they gain the confidence and expertise they need to continue to apply innovations and do so more effectively over time. And the final phase is about organizational transformation, where once management practices have been adapted at a strategic level, then there's a cascade of changes that would occur throughout the entire organization in line with those strategic level changes that would have been implemented. I want to quickly touch on the municipal sector and some of the work that we're doing therein. First and foremost, I'd like to comment on our work with the City of Kitchener. So the City of Kitchener is something like the 15 15th, maybe 20th largest city in Canada. It's recently started to take over Toronto as the innovation capital of the country. Very innovative and progressively minded municipality with a pretty exceptional leadership team. About 18 months ago, we started working with them. They wanted to evolve and adapt their approach to developing strategy. And one of their big challenges was the integration of planning practices. So recognizing they have a sustainability plan, a climate action plan, a community climate action plan, a well-being strategy, and so forth, and then their own core internal strategy. They appreciated that there was a lack of integration between all of these perspectives and plans, and that there was a real inefficiency and an inadequacy to splintering these planning priorities across so many different departments and processes. And so we brought forward Enterprise Evolution and many of the innovations that sit within it, including an approach to developing strategy that they were quite fond of. So last fall, this would have been October of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, the head of strategy convinced the corporate leadership team that they needed to go through this training experience. We had literally only 3 workshops that were each about 3 hours in length, through which I'll share a little bit more detail on the workshops just for your knowledge. We created 3 different experiences. So initially, we ended up having them complete some surveys on their strategy approach and COVID response. We talked about their own perceptions of what's not working, what's working, what needs to be improved, the things they're uncomfortable with. On the heels of that, we introduced some macro perspectives that bring a systems lens to how we understand the world, like donut economics, understanding the world through the lens of systems value, et cetera. Had them speculate as to how that might apply at an organizational level. In our second brief workshop, we engaged them in a strategy lab where they basically had a sandbox within which to test at a very superficial level a couple of systemic management innovations. In a nutshell, they had an opportunity to take a SMART goal that they had created through their strategy to, using the tools, identify all potential stakeholders that may be impacted, identify all the ways that value could be co-created and co-destroyed, and then begin to grapple with all of the metrics that they would need in order to know whether that value is being co-created or co-destroyed over time. And as an outcome of that, it just became crystal clear to all of them that they're making decisions and making resource allocations in the absence of 75, 80, 90% of the information they actually need. And that while as an organization, they say they prioritize community well-being and sustainability and so forth, they don't really have the means, the perspective, the tools, the approaches that they need in order to advance that in an optimal fashion. As much as they're making some progress, it's rather haphazard. And so as an outcome of that, maybe 6 hours into our conversation, they were pretty convinced that this was the path that they needed to be on for the future. And there was very little resistance in terms of leaders being confronted with a different way of doing things. They just saw that systemic innovations could actually just enable them to grapple with the challenges that they face in a better way, and that all they had to do is step into this space, and it was quite that simple. So in the last workshop, we spoke with them about the journey ahead and speculated as to what a roadmap could look like and how we could work together. And since that time, we've spent the bulk of the last 8 months designing a 2-year transformation program through which we will adapt all of the senior leadership team's management practices. And I'll briefly touch on where this has led, including our partnership with ICLEI and others. So I mentioned my other hat in the academic space, working with the Flourishing Enterprise Institute. So we've developed a global partnership with a range of NGOs, municipalities, academics, and people within the innovation community that I'm a part of. And it's all about taking the model that we've developed through Enterprise Evolution and beginning to test it with municipalities globally. In July, we jointly applied for some funding through the Transatlantic Platform, built teams of stakeholders across 5 countries, including Canada, but also Germany, the UK, United States, and Colombia. And the goal over the next several years is to continue testing Enterprise Evolution in various contexts so that we understand its applicability, its limitations, and how the program itself and the innovations within it need to be adapted and improved and enhanced to maximize their utility within a municipal context. Why don't I pause there, Himanshu? Maybe there's some questions?
Yeah, definitely. At the same time, a bit of housekeeping from my side. So I guess, Randy, we are almost in the final phase of this event. More than anything, what we wanted to highlight today is one of the ways to make some change at the local level, changes that are far-reaching, changes that would transform the system while being part of the system, So these are very transformative nature of changes that you have mentioned. So I definitely would give you some time to conclude And in the meanwhile, I just wanted to highlight for our audience as well, please look at the examples that Randy and Poria they have shared today as something that fits within your context. We hope that we have been able to inspire you to think along similar lines, along different lines. And more than anything, we wanted to highlight that climate action can only be possible in the real sense when we do transformative change, not at the national or the global level only, but at the very local. And Randy, that is what you have been showing so far. One question before I stop is, that thanks for the very important point. So the question comes from Siddharth on about the dangers of ignoring local complexity. How would you suggest municipalities prepare or hedge for potentially unpredictable failure of their NEX and be it nature-based solution?
I think it's a great question to lead me into some of my concluding remarks. Unfortunately, with the time constraint, I'm not able to take you through an example of one of the systemic management innovations that I hope to share with you and how it might apply in a practical context, which may have helped to answer your question. But what I will say is, I think the perspective, the knowledge, the information that municipalities have as a function of relying on the ways that we currently practice is somewhat limited. And I think the way to hedge and prepare for what is unexpected or what is perhaps even predictable is that we need more sophisticated approaches to understanding that complexity. In the current context, that isn't available at a strategic level. And there might be people within a sustainability department who really get it and have studied the information, but how it fits in and how that information can be used and valued systemically and at a higher level of the organization has not really been figured out. And so what I want to offer is that there is this exceptional global community of practice made up of innovators who have spent, pulled themselves out of exceptional careers and spent the last decade, in some cases two, studying what it would look like to take the practice of management accounting and to make that applicable to all capitals and what it might look like to govern that in a way that would lead to optimal results in a practical way that would appeal to leaders. And there's others who have done the same kind of innovation focused on how we understand and practice strategy development or the engagement and participation or collective and orientation and collaboration with multiple stakeholders. Systems thinking, system theory is a very complex thing. And my point, and I think what I want to conclude on, is that there is incredible innovation that is absolutely ready for prime time and that has been tested and used, that is available globally. It's just that its emergence and its disruption of mainstream management thinking is a slow process. And it's working with leading innovation organizations like ICLEI and UNU that create opportunities for us to engage and reach larger audiences. So I would encourage you to reach out. And if you do have questions or want to learn more about specific examples of these innovations or how you can make them available or learn more, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to put my contact details up on the screen and allow Himanshu to conclude. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity and your listening. It was a treat and a pleasure to have the chance to share.
Randy, thanks a lot for your inputs, and thanks also, Poria. We would also like to bring you back to the podium. This is very interesting. This definitely shows that there is a lot of untapped potential at the local level. We can go in a very systemic way. At the same time, I hope it has inspired others to think along the lines for their own context. We need not only apply it at the municipal level, but also at community engagement level, for example. How can we make, for example, the resident associations more dynamic, more robust? So the framing that you have provided was very, very helpful. And that was also the last question, that how people can get more engaged with this. If you can share certain resources afterwards, so we would also make your presentation available in the download center. We would share the link. And with this, Poria, now, again, getting back, from the last question from my side for you would be that given the network of cities that we have, that exist, for example, one ICLEI has, and different ladders on scale of development that they have, different scale of development they have, how do you see this happening in terms of, in certain countries, it would become very, very difficult, not only due to the political nature, but also simply there is not much resource left to address the questions of today. But at the same time, you want to include something that is likely to happen 20 years down the line. And that's my, when I start engaging with the climate change field, it becomes very difficult. So what sort of systemic change if you would like to bring at the municipal level, whether in the context of what Randy was saying or something on top of that, what would be your final recommendation?
No, thank you so much, Himanshu, for the legit question. I guess like that's a bit even more difficult for myself dealing with different cities in different continents and contexts, because while I'm thinking on Western Europe context and I'm thinking on Eastern Europe context, and at the same time I'm thinking in Africa, that is, if you're having different challenges, and all of a sudden China example comes to my mind, right? So when you're talking about governance, I guess first and foremost, we need to make sure that to move towards further sustainability, we need to give center stage to local governments. A very tangible and easy example is the case of US when President Donald Trump pulled the US out of the Paris Agreement, while American cities were here and COP23 in Bonn, having that tag on their code said we are still in. So that shows the importance of, yes, although we need to look into multi-level governance, globally, we need to give the center stage to cities. We need to do our best to capacitate them, and through different ways, be it financial resources, through different funding streams, be it capacitating them. As an example, you see ICLEI as one of the global city networks, and perhaps the leading one, is providing different capacity development offerings to cities from the local leadership level to very technical staff. So all in all, to me, is like we cannot change overnight the governance structure in cities and in countries because of all the complexities. What we can do, we can capacitate them, we can enable them, and we can empower them. So that's it was part of my first part of presentation. I mentioned that like there is a need, this shift, that while local governments are service providers, there is a need to shift, that shift is happening, but should be even fostered towards community enabler, that Randy also flagged it. So this is important, but first we need to capacitate and empower the local governments. That would be my answer. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Puriya, for this. Thanks again, Randy, for this wonderful presentation. I hope today, by taking a step back from the ledger-based solution per se, we had been able to inspire certain ideas regarding how a local level governance can be more agile, can be more flexible and robust. And I hope you would be able to implement it in different settings wherever you are. We very much welcome your suggestions and your comments. And with this, then tomorrow we go into another workshop, because the idea behind the Academy is not only to share our knowledge, but the idea is also to inspire action. In climate change, we all are together, and nobody can pretend that they have all the answers. Nobody can pretend that they have all the solutions. We all are in together. So today we looked about creating capacity at the local level. Tomorrow in the first event, we would be looking at futurist thinking. Again, going back to this question of, a lot of impacts of climate change are only going to manifest in next 10, 20, 50, or even 100 years. And how do we keep a vision of that? What does it mean for policy making? So we would have our futurist thinking workshop tomorrow with Coco Warner from UNFCCC. Please join us at 1 o'clock, that is local Bonn time. And thanks again for your time, Puriya. Thanks to Randy for your inputs. And I wish you all a great evening, great night, a great remainder of the day wherever you are. And we hope to see you tomorrow. We will make the presentation and everything else available in the download center. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.